I reread my first book, The Last Heir, and here are my thoughts. Welcome to today's video. I'm gonna say right from the start, if you haven't read the book The Last Heir by me, Summer Sullivan, don't watch this video. I will be saying some spoilers because I reread my book because this is very important, and no, I'm not posting this on any of my social media platforms. So my 70 subscribers are in on the secret is that I have a brand new cover for The Last Heir. I decided, looking at the covers for my two other books, that one just kind of didn't fit in with the general theme for the book, so I had a new cover redone. I'm going to show you guys, even though I'm not showing it on any of my other social media platforms for like 2 weeks. So, without further ado, here's the new cover for The Last Heir. It still has like the not for resale on it, but that will not be there when the actual covers come out. So, as you can see, there's a boat and there's a person on the boat looking at the starry night sky. And if you've read the book, I think you can probably guess who that is. So, I printed a bunch of these new covers, and I decided just to go back through and reread my entire first book just to make sure that everything was looking good and looking clean. And while I was rereading it, I made some notes about things I noticed, and I just wanted to share it with you who have read the book and explain my opinions more as a reader other than like the person who wrote it. And I would love to hear your thoughts on what I am saying as well. So if anytime you have like you disagree with me, you agree with me, or you have another perspective, comment down below. I would love to hear what you think. So let's get started. I have a whole outline over here off screen of the things I want to talk about, because lately one of my coworkers told me that my videos kind of seem like I have no idea what I'm talking about and just making it up as I go, which is completely true. I don't know what I'm talking about, and I do most of the time make it up as I go. But for this video, I have an outline. It's probably going to be a long video, but I'm figuring it's already like super niche. So if you're watching it, maybe you'll probably watch the whole thing. So I'll probably get like 4 views on this video. But here are my, so going into rereading this book, there were a couple things I had to remember. I wrote this book during COVID-19. So it's hard for me to compare it to my other books that I have written now, because I just wrote this in a completely different mental space. And I honestly think for me, I notice like the differences between The Last Heir and the other 2 books I wrote. Like I can tell that where I was mentally when I was writing that book based on the writing. And I'm not going to go to details of that. I'm just saying that's one of the things I kept in mind. The second thing I had to remember was that I was 18 years old when I wrote this, and I'm almost 21. I turned 21 in less than 2 weeks. But I was only 18 when I wrote this, and I had no intention of publishing it. So everything that I wrote was just a fun story for me. And honestly, I think there's more value than that if I was writing it being like, yep, I'm gonna publish this book. I wrote this, like, everything that happens in the story is because I thought it was fun, or I thought it was a cool twist, not because I thought someone else was going to think it was fun. So it was important for me to remember that right off the bat with those things in mind, is that the first few chapters for me don't flow as well as the rest of the book. But I think by chapters 5 and 6, there's really a rhythm there. And what I have to say about that is, like, I think there's a lot I can account to that, but there are other books I have read where it takes me a couple chapters to get into it. So if you happen to be watching this video and you haven't read my book, at least get to chapter 5 or 6 before you decide to like put it down, because I really think the flow and the rhythm of the book gets a lot better once you get through kind of the beginning couple of chapters of like character building and world building and kind of the foundation for the rest of the story. I think the story really kicks off at chapter 6. Another thing that I noted has changed is like the writing. As opposed to the book I just released, The Gatekeeper, compared to The Last Heir, the writing has just changed a ton in different types of ways, like the way I describe things, the dialogue. And I wrote down on my notes, it's kind of like the seasons of a show, in that if you ever watched The Office or Parks and Rec, which are, I'm not a huge Office person, but Parks and Rec is my favorite show. Season 1, Leslie, compared to like season 5 Leslie, it's almost two different people. The writing changes so much. It almost seems like the writers like finally found their footing. And I'm not comparing myself to the writers of like a critically acclaimed television show, but I do think that the writing in book 1 and the writing book 3, there's a huge difference between them, because I think I started figuring out more what I wanted out of the characters, what I wanted out of the story, and eventually found like that good rhythm. And just like in Parks and Rec or The Office, like I watched the whole Office, obviously like season 1 compared to season 4, like totally different writing, and I think the same thing happened while I was writing my book. So those were my thoughts like overall, and now I'm gonna kind of go more in depth to the story and the characters. So I'm going to cover like the main characters of the story, and I am gonna spoil some things from book 2 and possibly book 3, so just keep that in mind before I get going. So the first character I'm gonna start with is Alida, because I think she's arguably the mainest of main characters besides Sawny. The biggest note I have here is that she's way more likable in my second and third book, in The True King and the Gatekeeper, respectively. Not that she's not likable in book 1. I think she is, but in book 1, she's very privileged, she's very sheltered, and she doesn't have a filter. And I think some of the times she can come off as very snotty and as very, she thinks she's better than everyone. But you also have to remember that this is an 18-year-old princess. She's never been out of the palace her entire life. She's never been on her own. She's never interacted with people not as the princess. And in this book, for most of it, she's interacting as Nova Grey, which is her alter ego, her pretend identity. She's not interacting as a princess, and I think she has a hard time adjusting to that, adjusting as like, I'm an equal to people. There's like, I don't have a title anymore that makes me owed respect or anything. And I think that adjustment makes her sometimes come off as privileged, as snotty. But on the other hand, a big part of her growth is she's finally, for the first time, seeing the world from a different perspective. She's seeing the world not as a princess, but just as a normal Orinthian citizen. And I think that really changes her for the better. She starts to realize, like, hey, my life would be just as great if I weren't a princess. And she feels a lot of freedom. She feels freedom in the dancing scene. That still is one of my favorite scenes. I can say that, I'm saying that as a reader, because I wrote this book 2 years ago. So as a reader, like rereading that scene, Alida in the tavern, I think is really the beginning of her seeing the world from a different perspective, seeing, like, enjoying just being a person, not a princess. And I think that enjoyment and that new perspective continues when she boards the valley and she meets Sahar and she meets Roman, and she starts to realize, like, how much more there is to life than kind of the small, sheltered life she's been living. And I think that changes her for the better. I think it makes her more open-minded. I think it kind of takes away her privilege and her snottiness, because she realizes, like, just because I'm a princess doesn't mean I'm entitled to anything else than anyone else is entitled to, if that makes sense. That was a weird sentence, but if you know, you know. So, and then my final thought about Alida in book 1 is that her changes that are happening in this book show the most in book 3. In book 3, for me, Alida is probably my favorite character in that book. I think the changes she has learned, her willingness to open her mind to the world around her and accept new people and new ways of life, I think that shows the most in book 3. If you've read book 3, comment down below and let me know what you think about that. I wish I could get into more details about that, but it just came out, so I have a feeling a lot of people haven't read it. If you haven't read it, go on to falltodarkness.com. It's available on paperback. It's also available on Kindle. I will put both links below. Guys, book 3 is my favorite book so far, and maybe it's because Alida's like that much more likable, but book 3 is my absolute favorite. So many of my favorite things happen in that book. I love all my books, but book 3 is my favorite, and I'm actually in a couple weeks probably going to make a whole video dedicated to book 3. So if you want to be prepared for that video, go pick up the book right now. It's not a quick read, but I definitely think it's worth the length. So. Okay, moving on from Alida, we're going to go to the... I think if I had to pick the two main characters, I'd say it's Sawny and Alida. So main character 1B, which is Sawny. And the thing I noticed the most in the first book for Sawny is the amount of foreshadowing there is. And again, spoiler alert, we start off with Sawny, who's just this investigator. She's very traumatized. She's very emotionally, like, what's the word I'm looking for? She feels very deeply. She's emotionally traumatized. She's emotionally scarred. That's the word. And from the first chapter, like, the first time you see her, you can tell she's just in a lot of pain. She has a lot of, like, just unresolved pain and a lot of darkness. And I think I actually had someone get to chapter 2 of my book and tell me, I think Sawny has the shadow. And in my head, I was like, as a writer, that sucks, because it's like supposed to be this big reveal at the end of the book, and to have someone guess it at chapter 2 was like, come on. But when I went back and read it, and this might be because I knew what was going to happen, I was like, it kind of seems obvious that Sawny's going to have the power because of how much darkness is radiating from her. So much so you have to understand and kind of hypothesize that there might be another reason for her darkness besides just what happened with her parents and her unresolved mysteries, everything like that. So that hasn't happened a ton where people have guessed like the end of the book, Sawny. I have had someone guess Sawny's true parentage. So I guess a couple people have guessed, but for the most part, I think I've caught a lot of people off guard with the twist with Sawny. Sawny's entire arc in the first book is seeking a remedy for her pain. And that is in the form of answers to her mysteries, like who's her father, why were her parents killed. Her business is something that brings her a lot of joy, and I think that's her way of seeking a remedy for the pain, or almost a distraction from the darkness. And then finally, as the chapters go along, Sawny seeks a remedy for the pain with Adriel and the connection that they have. So throughout the entire book, we see her almost seeking out distractions for the pain, whilst coming to embrace it as a part of her that's always going to be a part of her. But I think there's a specific line in the book where she says, like, my darkness is always going to be a part of me, but that doesn't mean it has to control me. However, it does seem throughout the book that Sawny's running away from the pain. She's hiding from that pain, which obviously she would be. I would be too in her situation. But at the very end, she's finally forced to confront everything that's been building up throughout the book. Her darkness, her pain, her unresolved issues and conflicts. She's forced to confront it, and that's when she discovers that she has the shadow power in saving Adriel. And that obviously comes to be a huge part of the next book, specifically The True King. But in the third book, the Sawny's powers, again, plays a huge role, but not in a way you would think. If you haven't read the third book, again, go get it. Sawny's arc in book 3 is one of my favorites. Everything about book 3 is my favorite. I love every perspective in book 3. Whereas, like, sometimes reading book 1, like, I'd get to another character's perspective and I'd be like, okay, I want to read Sawny's again. I want to read Alida's again. In book 3, I really, like, love every story. There's not one I really like above any of the other ones, but Sawny learns a lot more about her powers than this initial discovery in book 1. In book 3, she starts to learn deeper things that are going to help her eventually in the war against Cassia. So I put, for this book, there was a lot of foreshadowing that eventually is going to come to play in both books 2 and 3. So that was my spiel about Sawny. Now I'm going to go into Ryder Grey, but not a whole lot because he doesn't have as many chapters as Alida and Sawny do. I wanted to cover the hints that he is, spoiler alert, Auden Frey. Ryder Grey is Auden Frey, who is Sawny's father. Again, if you've gotten this far and you haven't read book 3, I feel like I've given you enough warnings. I don't know if anyone would be able to guess the connection exactly, that Ryder is unafraid, but there are a couple hints in this book, and I wanted to touch on them because they're pretty small, and you'd have to really be reading closely to pick up on them. The first is Ryder talking about how he's still keeping secrets from Alida. In the beginning of the book, she's like, what else are you keeping from me? And he thinks about there's this one major thing he's still keeping from her. And the quote, I actually wrote it down, is, "That day, the girl, the death." So that is, again, it's not like a huge glaring red sign that he's Sawny's father, but it is just indicating that there's something horrible that happened in his past that he's actively been working to block out. There's also when Ryder goes to fight in the battle at the border between Antica and Orinth, he says he was going to fight for Alida, he was going to fight for his country, he was going to fight for Tyrion, and then he says, I'm also fighting for a girl that I lost long ago, who I haven't allowed myself to think about. I'm going to fight for her too. And again, it just indicates there was someone in his past he had to leave. And I think there's just an overarching tone of regret throughout his entire chapters. There's a lot of things. He has a lot of pain and darkness as well, similar to Sawny, which could be another hint. But there's just a lot of regret in his storyline. And eventually, I think it all comes to make sense when you realize the connection between he and Sawny, and him being in love with Sawny's mother, her having the baby, but he didn't know about it. It all just adds up to make a lot of sense. And I think there are a couple hints in the last era. I just found it interesting to go back and read and actually see there were a couple seeds planted. But again, I've had one person tell me like that they guessed that Ryder was Sawny's father, so I don't think it's super obvious. So don't feel bad if you didn't guess it. So that was the notes I had about Ryder. So they are not really main characters in book 1. They end up being main characters in book 3. But there are a couple things that I noticed about Sahar and Roman, Sahar Bao and Roman Vachi. And the main point that I wrote for them is that Sahar and Roman in this book, The Last Heir, are exactly who they are. They act exactly like you would expect them to act. And the reason I wanted to cover this is because I've had more than one of my friends, for one, but also just some people who have reached out to me after reading my book, and they're like, we hate Sahar and Roman after what they do to Alida. Basically, Alida, as you know if you read the book, pretends to be Nova Grey, hires Sahar to take her to Nagai to escape the big price that's on her head as Alida Goulding. They think she's just this innocent girl named Nova Grey, and they come to find out that she is actually Alida Goulding, and there is a price on her head. And Sahar and Roman trick her into thinking they're going to Nagai, but they actually go to Tilda, and they turn her in for the reward money. And of course, Alida's very upset. She says some things that she ends up coming to regret later. Like, she lashes out, and then she's like, I shouldn't have said those things, even though she's gonna die. One of the things that I wrote down for this is that Sahar and Roman are basically pirates, right? They're smugglers, but they could be considered pirates. Alida at one point says, like, she thinks they're pirates. And when you think of pirates, they do everything for money. They're mercenaries. They don't really, like, look out for people or think about morals. There is no morals. Like, I think in Alida's world, there's very black and white moral areas. For Sahar and Roman, they just live in this big gray area. And I think that's where a lot of the conflict between Alida and Sahar and Roman come. Because Sahar and Roman are loyal only to the people in their world. Nova Grey starts to become part of their world. So in turn, Sahar and Roman become loyal to Nova. But when they find out that she's not Nova Grey, she's Alida Goulding, Alida Goulding is not a smuggler, she's not a pirate, she's not a citizen, she's not a commoner, she's a princess. And that is as outside as she can possibly be from Sahar and Roman's world. Because Alida is not in their world, they have absolutely no loyalty to her. And on top of that, they find out she has a reward on her head. They do everything for money. So they have no loyalty to her, and turning her in will get them money. The choice is so clear. And turning her in, I think, is completely in character for them. Now, obviously, they come to regret it, and I think that shows a lot of character development for both of them. They come to realize that this is bigger than just their little world. This is bigger than their gray area. There's something else going on here. They truly didn't want Alida to die. They wanted the money. That's all they wanted. They didn't want anyone to get harmed in the process. And I think the knowledge that Alida is going to die is the reason they end up sending the Society of the True King in. So my main point with Sahar and Roman in this book is that everything they do, like, you can be mad at them for turning in Alida, but you can't say it's out of character for them to do that. Because I think very much so it is in their character to turn someone in for money, because money's their world. So I have a couple overall thoughts that I had at the end of finishing this book. I finished it in a couple days. I love the new cover. I can't stop looking at it. So here are my final thoughts about this book, is that I really enjoyed it, which I would hope I did. I'm the one who wrote it. I wrote this book for me to enjoy. I never thought that I would be sharing it with anyone else, and I did. And I hopefully have had other people enjoy it. I really like the story of the book, but that being said, I think book 1 is laying the foundation for where the story really pays off. And I think there's parts in book 1 where the story pays off, but I think the foundation laid in book 1 pays off the most in my third book. And I love this book, but I love the third book so much more. I think the third book obviously wouldn't exist without the first book, but I think foundation laid, like the bottom of a building laid, what's it called? Like maybe the word is foundation. The foundation laid in book 1 really pays off in book 3. And I think if you decide to keep reading the books, I think you will find that a lot of the things that might not have made sense in book 1 start to make sense in book 3. So those are my thoughts about The Last Heir, the first book I've ever written. And sometimes I look back at some of the writing or at some of the mistakes I made. I've cleaned up almost every mistake I found in there, but there's still some of the writing I just think is awkward, and I'm still proud of it. Like, are there things I would change? Yes, obviously, but it's the first book I wrote. So I'm really proud of it, and I hope you guys like it too. Thank you so much for watching this video, if you're still watching. It's a really long one, but I just had a lot of thoughts after reading it, and I was like, who am I supposed to talk to about this? And then I was like, I'll just post a video on my YouTube channel. I think I'm going to do the same thing for book 2, because I'm going through book 2 again, because I ended book 1 and I was like, oh my god, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Sawny's helping Adriel find his brother's killer? Like, what's next? So I'm going to read the second book, and I'm going to do a video on that within the next couple of weeks, and I'm also going to do a video on The Gatekeeper, I think within the next couple of months, so I give people more time to read it. If you haven't read it, please go to falltodarkness.com and get a copy, or it's on Kindle. Get a copy. I've said it multiple times in this video, it's my favorite book. With that, I'm gonna wish you guys a fantastic day. I turn 21 next week, so I'm about to party it up, so I hope you guys I'll share some of my good birthday vibes with you. And have a wonderful day. Bye!